Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon. We're sorry for the delay in getting started, but please welcome to the special interim session of the 911 Advisory Board. This is not our regular meeting, so we're going to be departing from our normal agenda. First, I would like to make a special welcome to our director, Mark Gilarducci. It's nice to have you aboard, sir. The first order of business, as I said, is this is a special interim session. For the board members, you do have under tab number 2 the minutes from our August meeting at Los Alamitos. We will not be considering that today, but it is there for your information. We'll be considering that at the next, for approval at the next regular session. The next item up is a closed session for the board. And, I'm sorry?
Andy, roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry, roll call, Paul.
All right, Chief Scott Howland.
Present.
Brenda Bruner.
Present.
Leanne Legowski.
Present.
Hanan Harb.
Present.
Sheriff Ingrid Braun.
Here.
Sheriff Corey Honey. Chief Edward Hadfield. Chris Herron.
I'm here, Paul.
Chief John Peters. Chief Craig Carter.
Thank you. Okay, let the record reflect that we do have a quorum. So the next item up is a closed session. So if the board will adjourn to the meeting room right outside the front door. Okay, thank you. We have no reportable action by the board in closed session, so we'll move on to agenda item. And Budge, you're up.
All right, so welcome everybody. My name is Budge Courier. I'm the 911 branch manager with Cal OES, and my responsibility is the 911 system for the state. So on the screen behind me, you'll see a series of slides we're going to go through. These slides are available if you want to reference our website. It's a publicly available deck. So start with just an overview of why we're here. We called this special session to really discuss the problem that's facing us. We have statutory requirements that we've been required to meet in the 911 branch, specifically with sustaining 911, increasing the reliability and efficiencies of 911, and also building out NextGen 911. So those are clearly established in statute and requirements that we in the 911 branch have to make sure that we're able to do. And at the same time, we have to find a way to have the revenue to meet those statutory obligations. And so that's really where the challenge lies today. We're going to talk through some points on how we're going to address the current revenue shortfalls in the near term, and then look forward and how we might address those more long term. We're going to talk about the urgent need that we have for legislative action to provide an update to the funding model so that we have the revenue needed to move forward. And then we're going to discuss some recent events that happened with legislation last year and really emphasize the importance of moving forward with NextGen 911 and what it's going to offer. And then we hope to have a dialogue and questions, and certainly at any time, if anyone on the board has a question for me, please interrupt, and I'll be happy to address your questions. I'm going to start with just providing a short audio clip that highlights some of the limitations with our current 911 system. So the audio clip is going to seem it'll certainly spark some emotion, but I'll have Paul play it for you.
911, what is the address of your emergency? Santa Cole, hello? Yes? What's the address of your emergency? It's on, I can't say it because I had a stroke.
So the point here is there are limitations with our current 911 system. One of the most blatant is location information and the inability to every single call determine where that 911 caller is. NextGen 911 can improve that and provide much greater location accuracy. It does many other things, and we're going to talk through them, but we understand the importance for immediate action to make sure we have the revenue to improve the 911 system. I mentioned that there's some legislative mandates that we have for the 911 program. I put these in here so that you didn't have to go dig through the government code to figure out where those regulations are. So we must design and implement NextGen. That's included in the Warren Act. And then in the Public Safety Code, there's a statement that we must maximize the efficiency of the 911 system. So we, in the 911 branch, we've taken every effort we can to maximize the efficiencies given the resources we have right now. And we've made every improvement with the 911 system given the limitations of this legacy environment we're in. We're prepared to take the next step. We were ready to release an RFP to move forward with NextGen 911. We had everything aligned, set up, ready to go, and then the set and a funding model that we had proposed was not approved, and so we need to make sure we've got the revenue in order to meet the plan to move forward with NextGen. So this past legislative session, we worked very hard with many of you here on this advisory board and many who I know that are in the room. We worked with PSAPs and vendors and legislators and regulatory people just to make sure that we crafted language that would update our revenue and tax code to provide us the resources we need to not only sustain 911, but to build out and implement NextGen 911. And we presented this, worked very hard, and in the end, it did not pass in the legislature. So we listened to the feedback that we heard, not only in session when it was being debated on the floor of the Senate, but also leading up to that time. This slide summarizes some of the major concerns that we heard as we were engaged in these conversations. There was some that were looking for a general fund, use of general fund, and concern about increasing a fee when there was a surplus of revenue. I'm going to address that on another slide. There was also a lot of questions on how the rate was set, so I've got some data on that. There's also confusion on the various roles that are out there. The world that I live in is very technical. Many communication systems work together in order to provide the resources needed during a disaster or just any type of emergency at all. Everything from when that 911 call comes in to when those resources are on scene to provide the help they need. So I'm going to talk through a little bit about that. And then there was some concern over the ability to successfully deploy this NextGen 911 system. Some viewed it as an IT system, and there has been some challenges there. And so we're going to talk through some of these. Before I get into the details of that, I want to kind of walk through where we are and frame the conversation as to why this continues to be important. This call statistics slide you've seen many times. I've added a couple of important details here. We get roughly 28.1 million calls, 911 calls in California each year. 80% of those are wireless, about 15% are wireline. But if you see on this graphic, the bulk of the calls are wireless calls, but the bulk of the revenue comes from wireline calls, at least by proportion. Our revenue model today is based on intrastate voice revenue. So what that means in normal everyday terms is when you look at your cellular bill, the portion that you pay for voice, which is a very small piece of your overall bill, is the only revenue that we have access to assess the current surcharge. And then of that voice piece, it's only those voice calls that are made from California to California. So it's even a smaller subset of that voice revenue. Wireline users, their typical, well, 100% of that line is dedicated to voice, so the entire revenue stream is available for the surcharge. And there's a greater likelihood that a wireline user is calling from California to California. And that's essentially why that, one of the main reasons people have wireline phones today. So bulk of our calls are wireless, but yet wireline is paying a bulk of the bills. The revenue model we're proposing corrects that and assesses a flat fee to everybody. Yes?
For wireline, as more and more individuals give up their hard lines to go to cell phones, does that mean businesses are paying the bulk of this, that's who's mostly's got a hard line?
So there is, I don't have stats on the proportion of how many businesses have wireline versus citizens, so I can't answer that from the data that I have.
Just extrapolating, that's my guess, is that mostly it's businesses that still have landlines. I have a landline, but most of my friends don't have landlines, and I'm over 50. So that says something. But so the people who are actually using 911, the human beings, the individuals, aren't paying for the service. It's being borne out, just in theory,
That's
by the
certainly
hard line.
Absolutely. And the other thing this stat points out is the majority of 911 calls that come in, wireless, are not paying a majority of the fee to support the system, which we think is not the way it should be structured.
And then, Budge, just to follow on that, so as we see a reduction in the number of wireline service that exists, that means our current revenue is dropping.
Yeah, our current revenue drops about 6% a year. 1% of that drop is that wireline usage that you're talking about, Chief, and the other 5% is the reduction in revenue on the wireless side. So while we see a dramatic increase in the number of wireless devices, the portion of the revenue that's dedicated to voice is going down more and more and more and more, which is why the revenue into the 911 fund is going down. So about 5% of the decline comes from wireless devices. The other 1% of the decline comes from wireline. So the other thing we're seeing with our current 911 network is an increase in the number of outages. So we can't share the details on this because of some of the regulation around it, but this is a real high-level summary on what we see in an average over a typical year. So we went back over to through July of last year, of 2017. We're seeing about 15 outages per month in the 911 network. So when there's a 911 network outage, that means that you're unable to reach 911 even if your device is actually working. You simply can't reach 911. And that averages out to about 255 hours of outage a month. The standard, if we were to follow the standard, depends on how you use your calculation metric, but it should be anywhere from 26 seconds of outage if it was one entire network for the whole state, or at most 190 minutes. So somewhere in there is the standard. We're orders of magnitude above where the standard is for the 911 network. And NextGen is going to dramatically improve this. NextGen is 26 seconds or less of outage every month. So just to give a comparison of where we're working toward versus what we have today. In addition to that, location information takes a different path to get to the public safety answering point today. Audio arrives across the 911 network. There's some connections that are made in order to link up the location and send that location information on to the public safety answering point. So we look at our location network separate from our 911 network. So these stats on this slide are talking about location. So this is automatic number information and automatic location information. We see an average of about 20 outages per month. We're seeing this trend increase. Much of the location information system is based on frame relay circuits, which were state-of-the-art in, say, 1970. So this network is aging, and we're seeing that play out in the number of outages that we see. An average of about 219 hours in a month where location information is just simply unavailable. In addition to that, so that when it's unavailable, it means no location at all is coming in. In addition to that, the current 911 network has limitations. It gets a little technical to understand all the limitations in the network, but at a high level, you probably drove by a cell site, and you see the usually 3 sides of the antenna. Each of those are a sector. Each sector can be routed to one and only one PSAP. So if there's a cell sector that crosses multiple jurisdictions, so if it goes through a police department and then hits CHP and then hits a sheriff department or another police department, we have to make a choice and send that to one of the 3. The system is not dynamic enough to be able to pick which of those 3. I have to send them all to one. Now, we have a legislative mandate to look at all these cell sectors. We report out on that project to this board. We look at all 330,000 cell sectors in the state. And if there's a threshold of a transfer rate of over 20%, we adjust it. What that means, though, is 20% or less could be going to the wrong PSAP because you have to send it to one and only one place. So that's a huge limitation. We also are seeing that perhaps the equipment itself, you've probably heard in the news, the ability for, they're calling it hybrid-based location. In other words, you take the location of your device rather than what the tower is telling you is available for location. And you have the ability to send that on and use that for location of the 911 caller. There may be some elements in our current 911 network. Obviously, it's large, it's expansive, it's aged, and tracking that location through every single one of those steps in order to arrive at the public safety answering point, that rich location information that's available from the device may not be able to make it through every single time. So you combine all that together, there's a location problem. And what that means is when location is not available, you have to spend valuable time figuring out where the 911 caller is. I could give you a personal story. I live across the street from a fire station. We called 911. My mother was choking, and it took 3.5 minutes to get that 911 call into the correct location. The fire station is located across the street. So literally, it was default routed and then transferred and then made it to the fire station. And then they dispatched the call. And as the truck drove out, they looked down, and my wife said she could look down, and they looked down, and they're like, hey, the house is right there. And they stopped the truck and got out and ran across the street. That's the location information we have today. And NextGen 911 provides us the ability to improve that to the point where we can deliver accurate location more often than 50% of the time. We're also seeing the effects that disasters have on our 911 systems. So right now, the 911 system is essentially a point-to-point connection. And it's all designed and defined to use those point-to-point connections. So what happens when one of those point-to-point connections gets destroyed in either a fire or a landslide or some other type of disaster? There's no easy workaround to get that call to go onto the route that you intend it to go. In some cases, PSAPs can back one another up through alt answer. There's literally a switch in the back room that they flip, and so when my center gets in trouble, I can transfer all my calls to Mitch, and that works real great until we're both involved in a fire and we both have to evacuate. And now there's no ability to provide that backup. So the other thing to consider is when you go into this alternate answer mode, you're sending your 911 calls to a location that's not really prepared to answer that call. They may have a different computer-aided dispatch system. They may have a different radio system, and so while they're able to answer that call, the best equipped location is the one it was originally intended for. So building out NextGen with increased reliability and redundancy enables you to have more reliable connections into the public safety answering point so that call can be delivered. So these outages, we can attribute them to the age of the infrastructure, the lack of redundancy, and really the inability for us to monitor the network also plays into this. And obviously, NextGen is the way to solve these problems. I mean, we've looked at this in a lot of detail. I've talked to other states who have implemented NextGen 911 and very familiar with the advantages it has for us. So one of when we're talking to people about 911, a variety of terms can sometimes all get blended together, especially technology. So we've used this graphic here for this board and in a lot of the conversations we've had. NextGen 911 focuses on getting the data from the 911 caller into the public safety answering point. That's what NextGen is all about, NextGen 911. The other tool that's available to our emergency responders is their land mobile radio system. So this is the radios and the push-to-talk devices that you see in either handheld or mobile in all the vehicles. In addition to that, once that call comes into the 911 center and that call is being processed, the data is then pushed over to what we call computer-aided dispatch. It has all the information needed to dispatch the resources to respond to the person that needs help. That connection from that computer-aided dispatch, which is typically a server farm in the back room of the public safety answering point, when you push that data out to the field, it's a broadband services connection that's enabling that data to get out to the field. FirstNet would be another tool available to send that data out. So that's another piece of the equation. But even if we spent millions and millions of dollars fixing this broadband piece to deliver the data to the field, without NextGen 911, you don't have the ability to take those data-rich sources and bring them into the PSAP. So both pieces of the puzzle are needed. And then the last piece is alert and warnings, and that's the ability to go out and push data out to those that need to be notified of what's going on. This conversation that we're talking about really is focused on that NextGen 911 piece. We want to build that out statewide so that we have the ability to take this data-rich information and deliver it with accurate location to the correct PSAP. And that's what we've been focused on. So we've talked a little bit about why NextGen 911 remains important. We've talked about it for a long time. So I thought it would be good if someone asks you, well, why is NextGen important? Here's a slide that summarizes that in just a few bullet points. So I included this as a reference for you. Network reliability, location accuracy, network monitoring, and technology integration. Those are the really big takeaways that NextGen 911 does for us. I'm very aware that we've been mandated to do this. So this is something that I'm required to do. So that's pretty important for me. And some of the advantages are we can deliver the call faster. 3.5 minutes to get to the correct PSAP is probably not a good metric. It offers increased reliability and redundancy, and we've built our plan that way on purpose. And it increases the location accuracy capability. Some of those limitations we talked about location accuracy, NextGen 911 solves those problems. And it reduces call delays and undelivered calls, and we've talked about the challenges of when the call is either not delivered or is not delivered to the correct location. So we expect the 911 system that uses current technology. I mean, that's everyone's expectation.
But when we're talking about location accuracy, we've spent a lot of time as a board talking about routing. And it seems that, you know, NextGen really solves that routing problem. And I look at the amount of time that my great staff and your great staff and every PSAP in the state spends trying to figure out how to route that one sector that could be 3 different agencies. Okay, who gets it? Versus NextGen solves that because the call goes based on jurisdiction and an accurate location on that. And so I think from the standpoint of that location accuracy is a much bigger solution And it solves a huge problem that we as a state have been struggling for many, many years because, you know, just looking at the number of people who've come before the board saying, hey, you gotta fix this. And unfortunately, the example we always hear is, hey, Domino's can figure out where to deliver the pizza, but why can't, when I call 911, you guys figure out where you can be? And, you know, I appreciate the example you gave with the, you know, family medical emergency. And I think, you know, in that case, you actually got a location. And I know many of us here have dealt with places where the location never showed up. And you have someone on the phone that needs help, and they do not know where they are. And the stress that puts on the 911 operator, the stress that puts on people in the field that are frantically looking for someone who needs help, when if we just had that location, it would all be solved. So I think that routing and location is really, really important to highlight because it's critical, and it's an issue that folks have come to us and said, hey, you gotta fix this.
Yeah, and that's, as Mitch pointed out, that's also a legislative mandate as well, that we have to fix that. So, yeah, we definitely agree. So, we'll talk a little bit about today's revenue model and where we are with the funding. Normally, in our normal session, we provide a graphic and a slide and where we're at. That data hasn't changed since the last board, so rather than go through the same numbers, we wanted to kind of bring it up to a high level and let you know what we can and cannot do this fiscal year and then into the upcoming fiscal years. So the current revenue model and what resources, revenue resources we have available to us in the 911 branch, we can support most of the 911 activities for FY 2018-2019. And I know the term most is a little ominous, but we receive invoices all throughout the year. We're tracking what we have available for revenue, and each and every one of those that we can approve, we will. As we get closer to the end of the year, less and less revenue is available, and we may, toward the end of this year, have to make some decisions where we can't support some of the things that we know need to be done because we just simply don't have the revenue to support it. That's what that most means. So as of today, we haven't told anybody we can't meet your need, but it's going to be very close this year, and there are some of the NextGen 911 activities, the next bullet, what can the current revenue not support? So statewide NextGen 911 implementation, we just simply don't have the revenue to begin that. We had an RFP ready to go, we had a plan ready to execute, and we had to completely put that on hold until we can identify a stable, sustainable, long-term funding model to meet that NextGen 911 implementation need. We also, as we look into next fiscal year, which for us begins in July, so if we look at July 2019 on through June 2020, we can't even sustain the existing system, and we certainly can't support any NextGen 911 activities. So there will be a direct impact to public safety answering points and local agencies if this revenue model is not corrected. That's really what we're saying, because the revenue model just simply can't support what we need to do. So we will definitely incur a shortfall, and it's going to be tens of millions as we look into the future and do our projections. So any questions on that before we go on?
Bud, one quick question. Under our current revenue plan or system, is there any room to adjust those fees?
Based on the current tax and revenue code, we are at the maximum that we're allowed to do. The maximum revenue is 0.75%, and that's exactly where we're set.
So we're maxed out?
We're maxed out. Okay. Yeah. So the next couple of slides really want to start talking about what's the plan moving forward. We definitely want to execute the existing 911 program mandates. What we've been mandated to do, we want to continue to support for obvious reasons. And we want to take the steps needed to update the revenue model through legislative action as soon as possible. So we put here early 2019. The legislative session starts in January of 2019. And we're going to need a coordinated effort among all the stakeholders in order to make this happen. We really are going to need everyone's help. One of the things that we've talked about is how can we better organize to get the word out on why this is important and what's the plan moving forward. So we've worked with the National Emergency Number Association, NENA. Most of you have heard that name. And we're asking for their help, and they haven't quite committed yet. But for an event, we're calling it 911 Goes to Sacramento. There's another event that happens at the national level called 911 Goes to Washington. It's really just an event that's focused on raising the awareness of 911 and providing an opportunity for folks to meet with their members of the legislature and engage in conversations about 911 and why it's important. As soon as we get approval to move that forward, we'll give you more information on that. We're targeting the end of January for that event. So, and you know, as you think this through, if you take our call volume we have each year, 28.1 million calls, if we went just one day without 911 in California, that's over 77,000 calls that would go unanswered. So this is extremely important, and we want to help get a collaborative effort to move this legislation through in the next legislative cycle. So as you have these conversations with the associations that you represent and with your stakeholders and those constituents that you have in you know, your areas that you're from, put together a few talking points on answering some of those big questions we got. So the first one, why not use general fund or just a one-time funding increase? That's a question we heard more than once. The main problem with that is it doesn't solve the long-term problem. Right now, this year, we have a shortfall of over 30 million, and that number just goes up bigger and bigger and bigger every year. So there's an ongoing long-term shortfall that we have to address. 911 is not like regular infrastructure. It's not like building a building where I can just do a lump sum, pay for the building, and then kind of go to this steady state maintenance phase. 911 is an ongoing service. It's a service that we pay every month, all year long, and we've been paying it this way for decades. So a one-time influx of funds, while it may help you in 1 year, doesn't help you over the long term. The other challenge it puts is state procurement. Those of you not familiar with state procurement, it's a very defined process. It works extremely well, but there are certain things you have to do in order to be successful in that process. One of the things is the long-term sustainable revenue model to support what you're doing. Every one of our contracts is a multi-year contract. So in order to support those contracts, we need a sustainable funding model that's good from year to year. Otherwise, we have to go through what's called a budget change proposal, and each and every contract would have to be vetted through that, the funding set aside for every contract that we do. And we manage hundreds and hundreds of contracts, so it would add so much time onto the process that we would not be able to keep current with technology. So those are some of the reasons why it's a challenge. The other challenge, if we go year to year getting the funding needed, is when we come into a lean budget year and resources are thin, it becomes very challenging to get what you need to sustain the program. So this one-time increase doesn't solve the long-term need, and we have a long history of using CETNA to reliably fund 911 in the state of California. So that's good news for us. The other question we got is how is this access line surcharge going to be set? So we want to make it clear that there's a process here. So I've summarized a process that takes several months in about 4 bullets, but I'll walk you through how this works at the state level. So the Department of Finance reviews and approves the revenue that's needed. So we make our budget projections and we submit it. Obviously, it goes up the chain of command within Cal OES and then eventually ends up over at Department of Finance. Then from there, it goes into the governor's budget, and then they propose the appropriation level for the 911 branch for that next coming year. Then it's approved and reviewed through the Senate and Assembly as they approve the governor's budget. So there's a system of checks and balances here. Once that all happens, that appropriated number comes back to me, and that there is what I'm allowed to spend. I can't go above that number. So we wrote the revenue and tax code that says starting from that number, the number that's been approved and appropriated through the governor's budget, we then recommend a surcharge to the California Department of Fee and Taxation Administration. That's a long acronym, but it's up there. based on the number of access lines. So the carriers report to us the access lines, we do some math, here's the revenue needed, here's the number of access lines, and then the surcharge is set to meet that revenue. Every year, that's how that process is done. Checks and balances all along the way, and we've demonstrated fiscal responsibility. For decades, we kept the rate below our max because we only generate the revenue needed to support the program. And so that's how we set this, and that's how it's done. Any questions on that?
Budge, roughly what would that number be per line?
Difficult question, because I don't know the number of access lines today. What I do know is numbers I've been given that I have publicly available off the FCC website. Based on those numbers, we have roughly 43 million access lines in California. So if you do the math and let's say we need to set it, based on the appropriations number, it's going to come somewhere between probably 25 and 30 cents a month. And again, that's going to depend on what level I'm appropriated at.
So less than it would cost you to make a call from a payphone, assuming you could find a payphone.
Yeah, and if you multiply it out for the whole year, it's less than a single coffee that you'd buy at Starbucks for the entire year. It's also would be one of the lowest in the nation. There are a couple of other states that are in the 20-cent range. Most other states are 50, 60, 70, and there's some states over $2. So this next slide is a little bragging, but I just want to point out that the team that I'm blessed to lead in the 911 branch is amazing. They've demonstrated performance over a long period of time. Every single project we've ever done, we've came in on time and within budget. We went back, and we don't know of any project where we've ever missed. Now, and if you know of one, let me know. I'll change the slide, but I don't think we have. I already mentioned this. This level that we're setting at will be the lowest in the nation, one of the lowest. There's a couple that are lower. And the surcharge rate that we have now, this 0.75%, it was at 0.5% for decades because we just didn't need the revenue.
But so, to put it in perspective, 0.5%, do we have any idea what on average folks are paying? What that 0.5% equates to for people?
We don't. So if assuming everybody paid the same, which they don't, wireline users pay more than wireless users. But assuming they all paid the same, and assuming there's 43 million access lines, it comes in somewhere around 14 cents. But there's 3 or 4 assumptions in there. So we can't definitively say what you're paying. We could just draw some conclusions to the average.
But if you take that average and say it is 14 cents, and the new fee structure is going to be 25 cents, we're not asking for an increase of 25 cents. We're asking for an increase of 14 cents.
Yeah, exactly.
Or actually 11 cents.
That would be 11, yeah.
A dime. Yeah.
Math in public, I know. Yes, and that's the point. A lot depends on, like I said, the process, because what we're asked to do as a 911 branch, I need to make sure I have the revenue to generate to do that. But yeah, it's not a significant, it's just changing the way the surcharge is structured so that it's fair for all those that are using the system. Yeah. And this is also the method that's used in every single state with 2 exceptions, California and I think the other one's Vermont, where they use a percentage model. This flat rate is the way that it's done. Yep. And another thing that, in California, we're in the unique position, we've been able to really lead technology innovation for the nation. And so we're still involved in this process, and we really want to continue to be, first to implement. We already have other states that are moving forward with NextGen, so we won't be first, but we'd certainly like to be in the front of that pack. Yeah. And just keep in mind, the technology that we're using today in the 911 system is based on the old rotary phones you had, with the dial. You spin the number and it go click, 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 click. That's how our 911 system was set up. That's the same system we're using today. Smartphones and the new technology that we have out there, they have changed 911 forever. Not only have they changed the technology requirements, but they've changed the expectation. And both of those things are happening right now. So, it's time for us to move forward. So I know that was a lot of data and information. We thought we'd pause for a moment and give you some time to respond, ask questions. We really want to convey this sense of urgency and enlist your help to engage members of the legislature, your city councils, county board of supervisors, public safety stakeholders, associations that you represent, and community groups to help get this word out. And I want to see what we've missed. So is there something that we haven't considered, some point you want us to emphasize or get additional information to you about?
Budge, there's a lot of vendors in the audience today, which is good to see. And so I wonder if the office did in this last legislative session or plans to, with this next go-round, engage them more?
Yes, that's certainly one of the things that we're doing, and we're hoping that they'll become partners and support that 911 Goes to Sacramento event, because obviously we can't sponsor that event. We can't use state funding for that purpose. So yes, we would definitely like their help.
Any other comments from the board?
Are we
Sure.
strictly looking at a legislative fix to this? Is that the only way to do it? And if we can't get, so obviously we need to find a senator or an assembly person to carry this forward. And I'm just spitballing here. What about putting a proposition before the voters? Not that they would, I mean, they're willing to tax themselves for better water, for parks, for whatever. It's just a thought to tell them, would you be willing to pay a quarter to ensure that you have NextGen 911?
Yeah, we haven't talked about that, but we can certainly make that part of the conversation. Yeah.
Any other comments? Carry on, please.
All right, so these next couple of slides, what I really wanted to do is, if I can get this right, take about 3 to 5 minutes to give a summary, so that if you need a quick little elevator speech to present to somebody who only has 5 minutes, which is usually what you get when you're talking to somebody, that maybe this little summary could be used for that. So that's what these next 2 slides are. So if I sound redundant, it's on purpose, because it is a summary. So if we look at 911 today, it's an archaic system, and this outdated system is contributing to 911 outages. It's limiting our location accuracy, and it's causing delays in our response time. And we're spending revenue to support an outdated infrastructure that's continuing to fail. So we think there's a better way to do this. It's also hindering technology innovation. There are newer technologies available that we would like to bring into this 911 environment to provide the help to those that need help. And the current 911 system just is incapable of doing that for us. So if we take and look forward at what responsibility we have, NextGen 911, not only is it a legislative mandate for us to implement, but we know that it will meet those limitations. It solves those limitations for us. It solves the location accuracy problem. Certainly helps us advance the ability to deliver the 911 call faster to the correct location with the location data needed. In order to do that, though, we need a sustainable funding model. We need a long-term sustainable funding model that is established in a way that's fair and equitable to those that are using the 911 system. And once we have that sustainable funding model in place, we're ready to implement NextGen 911 and make these changes a reality for every person who accesses 911 in California. We want to provide a reliable and resilient 911 system that's going to save lives. I mean, that's what this is all about. So with that, if you have any other questions, please let me know.
Any questions from the board? Okay, thank you, Budge. Moving on to the next agenda item, the 911 Advisory Board meeting was held earlier today. And Chris, can you give us a update on board recommendations for moving forward?
Oh, from the LRPC. So the LRPC actually, we're fairly busy right now, and we did discuss the CETNA and a little bit with Budge about what he just went over. Also talked about the NextGen regional working groups. And so one thing that we did want to clarify with Budge and his team is that even though there's the change here in the long-term plan, short-term, we are still going to have the NextGen regional working groups meeting with the state, and their next meetings are slated for, or they're being planned, but looking at the time in between Thanksgiving and our next advisory board meeting scheduled for December. So the long-range planning committee did come up with a list of topics for the regional work groups to focus on, and we shared that with the state, and hopefully that'll give them some direction in the information that we need them working on. Additionally, the LRPC decided to create a GIS working group, and Ryan in the State 911 office will be the liaison. Alicia Fuller from the LRPC will be our liaison to that group. We'll be working on a draft charter at our next meeting, and certainly at this point, no official request for people to submit their names to be on that committee until we create it. However, we did start that discussion, and we're looking for people with familiarity in GIS, not only who are in the PSAP industry, but those that are in city and county GIS divisions or departments who are not necessarily familiar with PSAPs, but have a GIS expertise. And that's our report from the LRPC.
Thank you. Okay, next item up is agenda items for future meetings. So if there are any requests from the board, we'll jot them down and get them on the agenda. So. And next item up is public comment. Paul, do we have a request for public comment? We have no request for public comment. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. We have a motion. Do we have a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We're adjourned.